There are currents in a life, powerful and unseen, that pull you away from shores you thought were permanent. They are the currents of time, of distance, of choices made in the quiet panic of youth. For 11 years, I had believed the tide had taken Sam and me in opposite directions, consigning our friendship to the warm, sun-drenched memory of being 19. I had built a new coastline for myself, a life of quiet observation and carefully managed solitude, documented through the lens of my camera. I thought I understood the ocean of my own heart, its predictable ebbs and flows. But then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, the tide turned. And there he was, standing on my doorstep, looking just as lost as I had once felt, bringing with him the entire, overwhelming sea of our shared past. He was the shipwreck I never knew I was waiting to find, and the harbor I had forgotten I'd been searching for. He had been sleeping in my bed for 3 weeks. Not with me, not exactly. He would start the night on the pull-out sofa in my studio, a respectable and friendly distance away, a buffer of air and unspoken rules between us. But somewhere in the deep, quiet hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, I would be woken by the subtle dip of my mattress. I never stirred, not really. I would feign sleep, a statue carved from anxiety and a desperate, fragile hope. I would listen to the rustle of him settling under the far edge of the duvet, his back a rigid wall facing away from me. It was a ritual built on a foundation of plausible deniability. My apartment was old and drafty. The sofa was admittedly uncomfortable. He was having nightmares since the breakup. There were a dozen reasons he could give, a dozen excuses I could accept, that would allow us to pretend this was just about comfort, just about friendship. But as I lay there, night after night, my own breathing shallow and controlled, I knew it was about something else entirely. I was a cartographer of his sorrow, mapping the subtle shifts in the weight of his presence, the changing cadence of his sighs. His proximity was a language I had spent a decade trying to forget how to speak, and now I was fluent once more, translating the space between our bodies into a dictionary of longing. That night was different. The rain that had brought him to my city 3 weeks ago had returned, a persistent, drumming whisper against the large industrial windows of my loft. He had been quiet all evening, moving through my space with a familiar restlessness that I remembered from our college dorm. He paced, he picked up my photography books and set them down without seeing them. He stood staring out at the slick, glittering streets of the city as if searching for a signal. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, sanded down by exhaustion. "Leo, I think I'm just going to turn in." I had nodded, keeping my eyes on the contact sheet I was marking up, the tiny black and white squares of other people's lives a welcome distraction from the overwhelming reality of my own. "All right, Sam. Sleep well?" He had hesitated in the doorway to the main living space, a silhouette against the warm lamplight. I felt his gaze on me, a physical weight, but I didn't look up. I couldn't. Looking up would mean acknowledging the charge in the air, the question that hung between us, thick and heavy as the humid, rain-soaked night. After a moment, he was gone, and I was left with the sound of the sofa springs groaning as he lay down. The inevitable migration happened earlier than usual. It was barely 1 in the morning when I felt the bed dip. This time, however, he didn't settle on the far edge. The mattress shifted more profoundly, the space between us shrinking from a careful foot to a mere hand's breadth. I held my breath, every nerve ending a live wire. The scent of him, rain and clean laundry and something that was just intrinsically Sam, filled my senses. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, a small sun in the cool darkness of my room. He lay still for a long time, and so did I. We were two people pretending to be asleep, caught in a shared lie that felt more honest than any truth we had spoken in years. I listened to his breathing, waiting for it to deepen into the slow, even rhythm of genuine sleep, but it remained stubbornly shallow, a mirror of my own. The silence stretched, pulled taut by everything we weren't saying. It was a silence filled with the ghosts of our 19-year-old selves, with the memory of late-night talks on worn-out dorm couches and the easy, unthinking physical comfort we had once shared. Then he moved. It was a small shift, an adjustment of his weight, but it was decisive. His arm, the one nestled between our bodies, brushed against my back. It wasn't an accident. An accidental touch is fleeting, quickly retracted with a muttered apology, even in sleep. This was a statement. His arm rested there, a line of warmth from my shoulder blades to the small of my back. I felt the contact through the thin cotton of my t-shirt like a brand. My heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, seemed to stop altogether. Time itself felt suspended, held captive in the space of that single, deliberate touch. This was the precipice. This was the moment where the map I had been carefully drawing was rendered useless, where the charted territory of our friendship gave way to a vast, unknown wilderness. I could have pulled away. I could have shifted my body, creating distance, reinforcing the boundary he had just so quietly erased. It would have been the safe thing to do, the thing the cautious, self-protective man I had become over the last 11 years would have done without a second thought. But the boy I used to be, the one who had loved Sam with a silent, hopeless ache, was still in there somewhere. And he was tired of being safe. He was tired of running. So I did nothing. I stayed perfectly still, accepting the weight of his arm, the unspoken declaration it represented. I let my own breathing hitch, a tiny, involuntary signal of my wakefulness. In the darkness, I felt more than saw him shift again, rolling slightly toward me. The pressure of his arm intensified, no longer a simple line of contact, but a gentle, possessive weight. His face was now inches from the back of my neck, and I could feel his breath, warm and soft, against my skin. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the glass, a percussion section for the frantic, silent symphony playing out in my bedroom. This was it, the turning point, the moment that arrives disguised as something ordinary, a sleepless, rainy night, but ends up redefining the entire landscape of your life. He was here. He was not just in my home, not just in my bed, but he was here, reaching across the chasm of years and silence and fear. And in that moment, all I could think was, finally. We met in a brightly lit, cavernously large lecture hall during freshman orientation. I was trying to make myself as small as possible in a sea of aggressively cheerful 18-year-olds, my camera bag a shield against my chest. I was a quiet observer by nature, more comfortable documenting life from behind a lens than participating in it. He was the absolute opposite. Sam was a supernova of casual confidence. He was a swimmer, and he had the broad-shouldered, easy grace of someone who knew exactly how to move through the world. He sat down next to me not because the seat was the only one available, but with an intentionality that caught me off guard. He turned, offered a hand that seemed to eclipse my own, and gave me a smile that could have powered a small city. "Sam," he said, as if it were the only name in the world. I remember stammering my own name, Leo, feeling like a pale moon suddenly caught in a star's orbit. Our friendship was immediate and inexplicable. We were a study in contrasts. I was the introvert who spent weekends in the darkroom, coaxing images into existence in chemical baths. He was the extrovert who thrived on the roar of the crowd at swim meets, fueled by competition and camaraderie. I thought in shades of gray, in composition and aperture. He thought in split seconds and finish lines. Yet we fit. Our disparate energies found a strange and perfect equilibrium. He would drag me out of my solitary world to team parties and late-night diner runs, and I would be the one he would find afterward, when the noise faded and a quieter, more pensive version of him emerged. We would sit for hours in the cramped space of our shared dorm suite, talking about everything and nothing. The pressure from his father to go into finance, my fear that my photography was just a hobby, not a calling. He was the only person who ever asked to see my photos and looked at them with genuine interest, not just polite curiosity. He'd point to a stark black and white landscape and say, "I can feel how quiet it was when you took this." He saw the world through my eyes, and in turn, he showed me how to live in it. My feelings for him grew so gradually that I almost didn't notice them taking root. It was a slow, creeping vine of affection that wrapped itself around my heart. It started with an acute awareness of his presence. I knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, The specific way he laughed when he was genuinely amused versus being polite. The smell of chlorine that clung to his skin after practice. Then it became something deeper. It was in the way my stomach would clench with a strange, protective jealousy when he talked about a girl he'd met. It was in the way I'd find myself framing him in my mind's eye, composing the perfect shot of him staring out the window, the afternoon light catching the gold flecks in his brown eyes. I never took those pictures. I was too afraid of what the camera might reveal, the undisguised adoration that I was so careful to hide. Loving Sam felt like holding a fragile, beautiful secret, one that I was terrified of breaking. Our friendship was the most important structure in my life. My feelings were a fault line running directly beneath it, threatening to bring the whole thing down with a single tremor. The physical ease between us was both a comfort and a constant, low-grade torture. We were 19-year-old boys, unburdened by the stiff formalities that would come later in life. We'd sprawl over each other on the lumpy dorm sofa to watch movies, my head often ending up on his chest, his arm draped casually over my shoulders. We'd fall asleep like that sometimes, waking up stiff and disoriented in the early morning light. For him, I knew it meant nothing. It was the easy, thoughtless intimacy of a brotherhood. For me, every point of contact was a spark, every casual touch a whispered question. I lived in a state of suspended hope, analyzing every gesture for a sign of something more, some flicker of reciprocity. I became an expert in the art of self-deception, convincing myself that the way he held my gaze for a second too long, or the time he absent-mindedly traced a pattern on my arm while we were studying, meant something. It was a fool's game, but I played it with devastating sincerity. The end, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion but a quiet, structural failure. It started with Chloe. She was on the tennis team, bright and bubbly and everything that made sense for someone like Sam. When he started dating her, he didn't pull away from me, not at first. If anything, he leaned on me more, dissecting their dates, asking for my advice, wanting my approval. I gave it, of course. I played the part of the supportive best friend with an Oscar-worthy performance. I smiled. I gave sage counsel. I told him how great she was for him. Every word was a small, sharp piece of glass in my throat. The pain was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache behind my sternum. Seeing them together, watching him look at her with an open, unguarded affection he had never directed at me, was like developing a photograph only to find the image was of someone else's happiness. I began to pull away first. It was a slow, strategic retreat. I was suddenly too busy with a new photography project to hang out. I had to spend all weekend in the darkroom. I started eating my meals in the art building's cafe instead of the main dining hall. Sam, caught up in the first blush of a serious relationship, didn't seem to notice for a few weeks. When he finally did, he confronted me with a wounded confusion that was almost worse than anger. "What's going on, Leo? You're like a ghost." We were standing outside the library, the autumn air crisp with the scent of decaying leaves. I couldn't meet his eyes. I just shrugged, clutching my camera bag like a life raft. "I'm just busy, man. This portfolio is killing me." He didn't believe me. I could see it in the hurt that clouded his face. "Is it Chloe? Do you not like her?" he asked, his voice softer. And there it was, my chance to tell the truth. My chance to say, it's not her I have a problem with, it's me. It's the fact that I'm so hopelessly in love with you that watching you be happy with someone else feels like I'm being hollowed out with a spoon. But I couldn't. The fear of his reaction, pity, disgust, the destruction of our friendship, was a physical barrier in my throat. "No, she's great," I said, the lie tasting like ash. "Seriously, I'm just stressed." That summer, I applied for and received an internship with a well-known landscape photographer based in Oregon. It was the perfect escape hatch. It was a legitimate, career-building opportunity that no one could question. When I told Sam, I framed it as an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime chance. He was happy for me, genuinely, but the sadness in his eyes was unmistakable. "Oregon, that's really far, Leo." We stood in the middle of our packed-up dorm room, the space that had been the center of our universe for 2 years now stripped bare and echoing with ghosts. The unspoken thing between us was that this was more than a summer internship. We both knew it was an ending. I wasn't coming back for junior year. I had already filed the paperwork to transfer to a school out west. I hadn't told him that part yet. Our goodbye was painfully anticlimactic. It took place in a sun-bleached parking lot, the air thick with the smell of hot asphalt. My dad's car was packed to the roof with my belongings. Sam pulled me into a hug, a fierce, tight embrace that felt like he was trying to hold on to something that was already gone. He clapped me on the back, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet of the morning. "Don't be a stranger, you hear me?" he said, his voice thick. I nodded, unable to speak. I just looked at him, trying to memorize the exact shade of his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood swimming accident. I was taking a final photograph with my mind, a snapshot to last me a lifetime. I got in the car, and I didn't look back as we pulled away. I couldn't bear to see him shrinking in the rearview mirror. It was the most profound kind of cowardice, running away not from him, but from the hope that he might, someday, feel the same. It was easier to live with the silence of distance than the potential noise of rejection. Over the next 11 years, we kept our promise not to be strangers, but only just. We became acquaintances who shared a history. We exchanged polite, infrequent texts. We liked each other's social media posts. We sent Christmas cards. His was always a glossy photo of him and Chloe, smiling in front of a mountain or a beach, a perfect, curated image of a life I was no longer a part of. I lived 1,000 miles away, in a different world, and I had convinced myself that was enough. Until that rainy Tuesday, when my buzzer screamed and I saw his face on the grainy security camera feed, looking older, tireder, and utterly lost. When I opened the door, he just stood there for a moment, dripping on my welcome mat, the city noise a distant hum behind him. "Leo," he said, and the way he spoke my name held 11 years of unspoken history. It wasn't a question or a greeting, but an anchor thrown in a storm. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of that supernova confidence. His shoulders were slumped, and there were new lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. The unknowing initiator had become the unknowing refugee, seeking asylum in the only port he had left. "Chloe and we ended it," he said later, sitting on my worn leather sofa, nursing a mug of tea I had made him. His hands trembled slightly around the warm ceramic. "A month ago, it was my fault. I think. I don't know. Maybe it was nobody's fault." He spoke in fits and starts, the story tumbling out of him in a disjointed narrative of missed connections, of growing apart, of two people who had built a life together only to realize they were living in separate rooms of the same house. He had been staying with a mutual college friend, crashing on their couch, but he said it felt wrong, like he was a ghost haunting someone else's happy life. I didn't know where else to go," he confessed, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading for something I couldn't name. "Understanding? Absolution? A place to stay?" I gave him all three. "You can stay here, Sam, for as long as you need." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. It was the look of a drowning man finally finding purchase on solid ground. And just like that, the quiet, ordered architecture of my life was redesigned to accommodate him. The careful boundaries I had built over a decade crumbled in a single evening. He was back, and the fault line under my heart began to tremble once more. The first few days were an exercise in careful navigation. We were like two people relearning a familiar dance after years apart, clumsy and hesitant where we once were fluid. We talked about the intervening decade in broad, safe strokes. He told me about his career as a consultant, a life of airports and conference rooms that sounded impressive and soul-crushingly lonely. I told him about my own journey, the slow and steady work of building a reputation as a photographer, of finding my voice in the quiet poetry of abandoned places and overlooked details. We avoided the landmines. Chloe's name was rarely mentioned, and the real reason for my departure from his life at 19 remained a buried, silent artifact. He was a guest in my home, a friend in crisis, and I was determined to play that role, and that role only. I was the quiet observer, documenting his grief from a safe distance. But the nights began to blur the lines. My loft was essentially one large room, with my bedroom partitioned off by a wall that didn't quite reach the high ceilings. Sound traveled. I could hear him tossing and turning on the sofa, his sighs punctuating the silence. Some nights, I'd hear him get up and pace the length of the concrete floor, his footsteps a restless metronome marking the passage of his unhappiness. One night, I heard a small, choked sound, and I knew he was crying. The sound was a physical blow. I lay in my bed, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, fighting the overwhelming urge to go to him. But what would I do? What comfort could I offer that wouldn't betray the feelings I had kept hidden for so long? To hold him would be to confess everything without saying a word. So I stayed put, my heart aching with a useless, impotent empathy. I was his harbor, but he was moored just out of reach of the shore. The first time he came into my room was the 5th night. He appeared in my doorway, a tall shadow in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. "Leo? You awake?" he whispered. My heart leaped into my throat. "Yeah, what's up?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous gesture I remembered well. "Bad dream," he said, his voice small. "Do you mind if I just for a bit?" "The couch feels, I don't know, big." It was a flimsy excuse, but I saw it for what it was, a plea for proximity, for the simple, animal comfort of not being alone in the dark. I shifted over, pulling back the duvet on the empty side of the king-sized bed. "Sure. Come on." He slipped in, keeping a careful, deliberate distance between us. He lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, and I did the same. We didn't talk. We just lay there, the vast space of the mattress a testament to the boundaries we were both afraid to cross. After about an hour of this silent communion, he whispered, "Thanks, Leo," and slipped back out of the room as quietly as he had entered. It was a test, a first step onto the fragile ice of a frozen-over lake. And when it held our weight, the ritual began. The pretext started to dissolve. Bad dream became, "The radiator is making a weird noise," which became, "Your sofa is killing my back," until finally, there was no pretext at all. He would simply appear at my door, a silent question in his eyes, and I would move over without a word. Our shared space on the bed became a new kind of territory we were exploring together. The initial, rigid distance between us began to shrink, inch by painful inch. One night, our shoulders brushed. Another night, I woke to find his foot resting against mine. Each instance of accidental contact sent a jolt through my system. My mind became a frantic archive, cataloging every touch, every shift in his breathing, every sound he made in his sleep. I was living in a state of heightened sensory awareness, my world narrowed to the few feet of mattress that separated his body from mine. I was starving, and he was offering me breadcrumbs, and I devoured every one. I tried to convince myself it was a dangerous fantasy, a projection of my own long-dormant desires. He was broken, grieving the end of a decade-long relationship. He was seeking comfort, nothing more. He was turning to the one person who represented a time before his heart was ever broken. I was a living piece of his past, a historical artifact he was clinging to for stability. This narrative was the safe one. It protected me from the terrifying possibility that this might mean something more. It allowed me to maintain my role as the caregiver, the steady friend, without having to confront the hope that was blooming, wild and untended, in the barren landscape of my heart. Hope was a dangerous thing. I had learned that at 19. It could lead you to misinterpret kindness as affection, friendship as love. It could break you far more effectively than loneliness ever could. Yet, the evidence mounted. He started to bring parts of his life into my space in a way that felt less temporary. A few of his books appeared on my nightstand. His toothbrush sat next to mine in the bathroom. He bought groceries, filling my perpetually understocked fridge with things he liked to eat. My loft, once a sanctuary of solitude, was slowly, subtly, becoming a home for two. We fell into a domestic rhythm that was so comfortable it was terrifying. We'd cook dinner together, our bodies brushing past each other in the small galley kitchen. We'd sit on the sofa in the evenings, not with the careful space of guests, but with the easy proximity of a long-established couple, his leg resting against mine as we watched a movie. He started touching me more outside the bedroom, too. A hand on my shoulder as he passed behind me. A light touch to the small of my back to get my attention. These were small, fleeting gestures, but they were building a new architecture of intimacy around us, a structure whose blueprints I couldn't fully read. My photography became my only outlet for the overwhelming tension. I couldn't photograph him. That was still a line I couldn't cross, but his presence began to infuse my work. I started taking pictures inside the apartment, something I rarely did. I photographed the depression his head left on the pillow next to mine in the morning light. I took a picture of his coffee mug, a smudge of lipstick from Chloe he had somehow missed still faintly visible on the rim, sitting next to my own stark white one. I shot the way his jacket was thrown over the back of a chair, the sleeves still holding the shape of his arms. My art became a secret conversation with myself about him. The images were filled with a sense of presence and absence, of longing and quiet joy. They were portraits of him without him ever being in the frame. They were the truest things I could say because they were silent. And then came the night of the rain. The night he laid his arm across my back. The night the silence between us finally became so loud it was deafening. After he touched me, after I stilled my breathing to signal I was awake, after he shifted closer until I could feel his breath on my neck, we remained frozen in that tableau for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick with unspoken words, with 11 years of questions. My body was thrumming with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. I was on the verge of something, a fall or a flight, and I didn't know which. I had to do something. I couldn't just lie there all night, trapped in this limbo of almost. Slowly, deliberately, I rolled over to face him. In the dim light, I could just make out the shape of his face. His eyes were open, and they were fixed on me. There was no surprise in his expression, only a kind of solemn, searching intensity. His hand was still resting on me, now trapped between our bodies. The heat of it seeped through my shirt, a focal point in a universe of sensation. We looked at each other, and in that shared gaze, the pretense of sleep, of accident, of friendship, dissolved completely. We were just two men, in a bed, in the middle of a rainy night, and the space between us was no longer an empty void but a field of immense gravitational force. His eyes searched mine, and I saw a storm of emotions there. Fear, confusion, and something else, something softer and more vulnerable that looked terrifyingly like my own reflection. His lips parted slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words came out. He was the unknowing initiator, but he had reached the edge of his own understanding. He had followed a current of instinct and need that had led him here, to my bed, to this moment, and he didn't know what to do next. And in that instant, I realized the roles had reversed. For so long, I had been the passive observer. But now, he needed me to be the one to act, to give him permission, to show him the way across this new frontier. My own hand, which had been lying inert at my side, moved with a will of its own. I lifted it slowly, watching his eyes track the movement. I brought my fingers to his cheek, my touch tentative. His skin was warm, a little rough with stubble. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into my touch, a small, almost imperceptible movement that was a confession in itself. A soft sound escaped his throat, a sigh of surrender. It was all the confirmation I needed. I closed the final few inches between us, my heart a frantic drum against his. The world narrowed to this single point, this single action. The past and the future ceased to exist. There was only the here and now, the scent of rain, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful reality of Sam. The first kiss was not a collision. It was a question, a gentle exploration. It was soft, hesitant, and unbearably tender. It was the taste of salt and uncertainty and 11 years of pent-up longing. It was a conversation held without words, a story of two timelines finally converging. When we broke apart, we didn't move away. We rested our foreheads together, our breath mingling in the small space between us. His hand moved from my back to my neck, his thumb stroking my skin in a slow, soothing rhythm. I kept my eyes closed, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. The fault line had finally ruptured, and the world hadn't ended. The structure hadn't collapsed. Instead, it felt like the ground had shifted to create a new, more solid foundation beneath us. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was the only word he said. It was the only word he needed to say. It held everything inside it. The apology for his confusion, the gratitude for my patience, the terror and wonder of this new, uncharted territory. I opened my eyes and met his gaze. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed now by a raw, unguarded vulnerability. He was no longer hiding. He was here, completely and utterly present. I brought my other hand up to cup his face, holding him as if he were something infinitely precious. And I said the only thing that mattered. I know, the morning after was fragile. We woke up tangled together, my arm thrown over his waist, his head resting on my shoulder. It felt so natural, so right, that for a moment, I forgot to be afraid. The early light, soft and gray, filtered into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful. Then, I felt him stir, and the anxiety came rushing back in. What now? What did this mean? Was this a fleeting moment of comfort-seeking in a storm of grief, or was it the start of something real? He slowly extracted himself from my embrace and sat up on the edge of the bed, his back to me. The space he left behind felt instantly cold. I watched the line of his spine, the tension in his shoulders, and I felt a familiar dread creeping in. He didn't speak. He just sat there for a long time, running a hand through his messy hair. I stayed quiet, giving him the space he seemed to need, though every instinct screamed at me to reach out, to pull him back, to reassure him. Finally, he stood up, grabbed his clothes from the floor, and walked out of the bedroom without a word. I heard the bathroom door click shut. I lay there, listening to the sound of the shower, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. The easy intimacy of the night had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind a heavy, uncertain residue. When he came out of the bathroom, he was fully dressed. He didn't look at me. He just grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door. I'm gonna go for a run," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Get some air, Sam," I started, but he was already opening the door. "I'll be back later," he said, and then he was gone, the door closing with a soft, final click. He didn't come back later. The hours stretched into a long, agonizing day. I paced the loft, my own personal cage. I checked my phone 100 times. No calls. No texts. The silence was a condemnation. I replayed the kiss, the night, over and over in my mind, searching for what I had done wrong. Had I pushed him? Had I misread everything? The safe narrative I had constructed, that he was just seeking comfort, came roaring back, mocking me. Of course, that's all it was. He was grieving and lonely, and I was a warm body, a safe harbor. And in a moment of weakness, he had let the lines blur. Now, in the harsh light of day, he was regretting it. He was running from it. He was running from me. The familiar ache of being 19, of loving him in secret, returned with a vengeance, but this time it was worse. This time, I had known what it felt to have him, if only for a few hours. The loss was no longer theoretical. It was a tangible, gaping wound. By evening, my anxiety had curdled into a cold, hard knot of despair. I felt like a fool. A hopeful, naive fool who had let 11 years of carefully constructed defenses be dismantled in 3 short weeks. I looked around my apartment, and all I could see were the ghosts of him. His jacket on the chair, his book on my nightstand. The space was haunted by his brief, intense presence. I had let him in, not just into my home, but into the carefully guarded fortress of my heart, and he had fled at the first sign of genuine emotional stakes. The pain was so sharp, so specific, it felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait in this torturous limbo. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over his name. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't endure another minute of this silence. Before I could call, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from him. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. "Can we talk?" My fingers trembled as I typed back. "Where are you?" Downstairs. At the coffee shop on the corner. I'll be right there. The coffee shop was mostly empty, the late-night crowd not yet arrived. Sam was sitting at a small table in the back, staring into a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn. When he saw me, he flinched, a small, guilty movement. I sat down opposite him, the small table feeling like a vast, empty canyon between us. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the hiss of the espresso machine. I waited for him to speak. He was the one who had run. He was the one who had to start this. "Leo, I am so sorry," he began, his voice low and strained. "For just leaving like that. It was a coward's move." I just nodded, my expression unreadable. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I had spent my entire life making things easy for him. I freaked out, he continued, finally meeting my eyes. His were filled with a miserable conflict. Last night was. I didn't expect it. And it was exactly what I wanted. And that scared the hell out of me. I found my voice, and it was colder than I intended. "What were you scared of, Sam?" He looked down at his hands, which were clenched on the table. "Everything. I just ended a 10-year relationship. My whole life just blew up. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. And then you. You've always been this constant. This fixed point. The one person who has always just gotten me. And last night, that shifted. And all I could think was that I was going to ruin you too. That I was just this emotional wreck, and I was going to pull you down with me. Or that I was using you. Using our friendship to fill this hole that Chloe left." He finally looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And that's not fair to you. You deserve better than to be someone's rebound. Especially not mine." I listened to his words, and I felt the ice around my heart begin to crack. He wasn't running from me. He was trying, in his own clumsy, misguided way, to protect me. He was afraid of his own feelings, of their legitimacy, of his capacity to hurt the one person he had left. The anger I had been nursing all day softened into a deep, weary sadness. I finally understood. The unknowing initiator wasn't just unaware of my feelings. For years, he had been a stranger to his own. His life had been set on a course, with Chloe, with his career, and he had never stopped to question the currents carrying him along. Now, adrift, he was finally having to look at his own heart, and the reflection staring back at him was unfamiliar and frightening. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his clenched fists. He flinched at the contact, then relaxed, his fingers uncurling under mine. "Sam," I said, my voice gentle now, "you need to stop thinking about what I deserve. And you need to stop thinking about Chloe, and about the last 10 years, and about who you're supposed to be. Just for a minute. And you need to tell me, honestly, what you feel. Right now. Not what you think you should feel. What you do feel." He stared at our hands, then back at my face. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The confession, when it came, was a quiet, broken whisper. "I feel safe with you. Safer than I've felt with anyone, for a very long time. Maybe ever." He swallowed hard. "And last night, when I kissed you, it felt like coming home. And that's what scares me. Because I don't know if I have a right to feel that way. I don't know if it's real." "It was real for me," I said, my voice unwavering. "It's been real for me since I was 19. The admission hung in the air between us. His eyes widened, a flicker of shock followed by a wave of dawning, painful comprehension. He looked back over the years, and I could see him reinterpreting everything through this new lens. My quietness, my sudden distance, my move across the country. The pieces were finally clicking into place for him. "Leo, why didn't you ever?" He trailed off, the question unfinished but understood. "Because I was scared," I said, a sad smile touching my lips. "Same as you are now. I was terrified of losing you. Our friendship was the most important thing in my life. I wasn't brave enough to risk it for the possibility of something more." I squeezed his hand. "Look at us. A pair of cowards." A small, watery laugh escaped him. It was the first genuine sound of relief I had heard from him all day. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. He was asking for a map, for a way forward through this new landscape. "Now," I said, my voice firm with a certainty that surprised me, "we stop being cowards. We stop trying to predict the future or analyze the past. We start with right now. I know how I feel. You know how you feel, even if it scares you. That's enough. We can start there. I stood up, still holding his hand, and pulled him gently to his feet. Come home, Sam. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and he saw no doubt, no hesitation. He just saw me. He nodded, a single, decisive movement. And together, we walked out of the coffee shop and back into the rainy night, leaving the ghosts of our fear behind us at that small, empty table. The return to the apartment felt different. The air was no longer thick with tension and unspoken questions, but with a fragile, tentative peace. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We moved around each other with a new, deliberate tenderness. When it was time for bed, there was no ritual, no pretext. We walked into the bedroom together. He didn't hesitate. He pulled back the duvet on his side of the bed. It was his side now, and slipped in. I followed, and when I settled next to him, he immediately rolled toward me, wrapping his arms around me and pulling me against his chest. He buried his face in my hair and held me, not with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to a raft, but with the quiet, solid certainty of a man who had finally found his harbor. His body was warm and strong against mine, and for the first time, I let myself fully relax into him, my own arms wrapping around his waist. There were no more boundaries to navigate, no more unspoken rules to decipher. There was only this, the simple, profound truth of our bodies together in the dark. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it, he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with sleep and 11 years of regret. You're here now, I whispered back. That's all that matters. The days that followed were a process of gentle excavation, of learning this new version of each other. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by an explicit, spoken tenderness. We learned that romantic intimacy between us was not a grand, passionate affair, but a continuation of the quiet, comfortable language we had always spoken. It was in the way he'd bring me a cup of coffee in the morning, remembering exactly how I took it. It was in the way I'd put a hand on the back of his neck when I could see he was stressed from a phone call about his old life, a silent offering of support. It was in the long stretches of comfortable silence we could share, sitting side by side, me editing photos and him reading, the simple act of sharing space a conversation in itself. We were not fixing each other. We were simply making space for the other to heal, creating a sanctuary where our broken pieces could be laid out and examined without judgment. He started to talk more about Chloe, not with the raw grief of the first few weeks, but with a kind of thoughtful, sad acceptance. He was mourning the loss not just of a person, but of a future he had thought was guaranteed. I listened, and I didn't feel jealousy. I felt a deep empathy for his pain. I understood that his love for her had been real, and that its ending didn't invalidate it. It was simply a part of the long, complicated road that had, and probably, led him back to me. His past was part of him, just as my years of silent longing were part of me. We didn't have to erase those parts of ourselves to be together. We just had to make room for them. One afternoon, he walked into my studio space while I was pinning up the prints I had taken since his arrival, the empty coffee cup, the jacket on the chair, the impression on the pillow. He stood behind me, looking at the images in silence for a long time. I braced myself, suddenly feeling exposed, as if he were reading my secret diary. "These are all about me, aren't they?" he said softly. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. He pointed to the photo of the pillow. "This is what you see, isn't it?" he asked. "The spaces where I am. The evidence I leave behind." I nodded again. "I'm a photographer," I said, my voice quiet. "It's how I make sense of the world." I noticed the details. He turned my face toward him and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that tasted of coffee and certainty. "I'm glad you notice," he said. "I think I've been waiting for someone to really notice for a long time." Slowly, he began to build a new life, with my loft as his base. He found a new job, one that didn't require him to be on a plane 3 weeks out of every month. He started exploring the city, not as a visitor, but as a resident. And he started to smile again, the genuine, unburdened smile I remembered from when we were 19. The supernova wasn't as bright, perhaps. It was tempered by the quiet wisdom of loss and experience, but its warmth was steady and true. The guest room, the pull-out sofa, became a permanent storage space for his boxes. The door to it remained closed. He had no more use for it. His place was with me. We never had a grand conversation where we defined our relationship. We never needed to. Our commitment was built not on labels, but on 1,000 small, daily actions. It was built on the choice to turn toward each other in the night, on the unspoken promise to be a safe harbor in any storm. It was in the easy way we started using the word we when talking about the future. We were two solitary coastlines that had been reshaped by the tides of life, our edges worn down by loss and loneliness, until we finally fit together. We were not the boys we had been at 19, full of unbridled potential and naive hope. We were men, scarred and cautious, who had found their way back to each other not by chance, but by a deep, gravitational pull that had never truly faded. There are moments in your life that are doors. You stand before them, and you can choose to walk through into an unknown future, or you can choose to stay in the familiar room of your past. For 11 years, I had kept the door to my heart firmly closed, convinced it was the only way to protect myself. But Sam's arrival wasn't a knocking. It was a quiet dismantling of the lock from the inside. He didn't force his way in. He simply showed me that the door was never really locked at all. He reminded me that the greatest risk is not in loving, but in building walls so high you forget what it feels like to live in the sun. We had found our way back to a truth we were too young and too scared to acknowledge the first time around. That home is not a place, but a person. And in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, we had finally come home.